Hey everyone, how do you know you can trust Bitcoin? And what exactly are you trusting when you do trust Bitcoin? Okay, so a helpful analogy is the internet. Anytime you use the internet, there's actually a lot of trust there, especially if you process a financial transaction on the internet. You're trusting all of the different parties in the process not to cheat you, not to scam you, to do what's right. You're trusting the code that runs the internet. You're trusting that there's not any massive bugs in the internet. You're trusting all of those things. So it's helpful when people look at Bitcoin, they have a hard time looking at it through the lens of other things they already trust, like the internet or their smartphone or the apps on their smartphone. So let's go through some of the building blocks of internet, of the same building blocks of the internet that apply to Bitcoin. Okay, so the first off is the computer code that runs Bitcoin. When you are using Bitcoin, you are trusting the code that runs Bitcoin the same way you are trusting the code when you use the internet. And as with the internet, there are computer programmers that write that code. The big difference with Bitcoin, unlike the internet as a whole, is that Bitcoin is open source, meaning the entire code of the entire Bitcoin network is open for the world to see, for literally anyone on the entire world to audit the code of the Bitcoin network and to audit every transaction of the Bitcoin network. They can't tell who sent money to who, but absolutely all of the code that runs it is open source, which means anyone can audit it. And it is the most scrutinized code in the entire world. So the code that runs on your bank's servers or on Amazon, maybe a dozen programmers reviewed the code that processes your bank payments or something like that, or even fewer, maybe, a handful of people really scrutinize the code for your financial institution. In the case of Bitcoin, millions of people are looking at that code, every single line of code, trying to predict what could go wrong, all of that. So with Bitcoin, you are trusting the code of Bitcoin, but it's open source. It's viewable by anyone, and if you are not a computer programmer, I presume almost none of the people watching this video are computer programmers, you can get somebody to go review the code of the Bitcoin network. And a lot of the early investors in Bitcoin did that. Wences Caceres and a lot of the others hired armies of the very best computer software developers they knew and said, please break this code, because I'm about to put a bunch of money in it, and if it can be broken, I want to know. And every time the programmers came back and said, this is amazing, like this code is really, really, really good. So Bitcoin is the most trustworthy code that runs in the world, and you are already trusting code every time that you use anything in your life, regardless. So Bitcoin is the more trustworthy of the code. Now, as with the internet, in the very early days of the internet, some people said, well, I don't trust the internet because what if there's a bug? What if there's a bug in the internet code? Well, right now, if somebody told you that, if they said, well, I don't feel comfortable with the internet because what if there's a bug in it? Your response would be probably to look at them funny. You'd think, wait, a bug in the internet? Like, the internet's this like massive network. There's not like a bug in the internet. And secondly, do you think they wouldn't fix it? Like, the whole point of the internet is, what's the probability that someone's going to discover a bug in some of the code that runs the internet, and it's going to take the internet down forever, and the internet will just never be a thing anymore? The probability of that is zero, literally zero. If there is a bug in something related to the internet, the computer programmers that manage the software of the internet will fix the bug and get the internet running as soon as conceivably possible. It's the same with Bitcoin. If there was some bug in the code of Bitcoin, the same very diligent programmers that are programming Bitcoin would fix that bug as fast as conceivably possible. So with Bitcoin, you are trusting computer code, but it is more audited and more secured and open source computer code, and more audited and more secured than any other computer code that you trust anything with in your life. Okay, second, you're trusting computer programmers, but again, it's open source code, and you trust computer programmers with everything else you do in your life as well that's connected to anything with regard to computer code, and that includes everything from your oven and all the electronic controls on your washing machine, your dryer, your refrigerator, like all of that's got computer code behind it. All right, well, with Bitcoin, you're also trusting the incentives of the system. You're trusting the people of the network not to all of a sudden decide that we're all going to use Bitcoin that has 22 million coins instead of 21 million coins. Well, the way Bitcoin works is Bitcoin is a consensus of 100% of the participants, which means if even a single person in the entire Bitcoin network disagrees with a change to the Bitcoin network, then the change, the protocol and the change will break off into its own network. So in the case of Bitcoin, if somebody came along, one second. If somebody came along and said, I think there should be 42 million Bitcoin instead of 21 million Bitcoin, then the only people that would follow that network would be people who wanted there to be twice as many Bitcoin, which makes no sense because it would dilute the number of Bitcoin everybody has. It would make the entire, all of the Bitcoin that already exists would become half as valuable if suddenly there was twice as much Bitcoin and they got, distributed to who knows who. So virtually none, if not zero, of the current hundreds of millions of people that own Bitcoin are going to agree to change the total number of Bitcoin. And if even one person disagrees, then the current version of Bitcoin keeps going like it is. There might be another version of Bitcoin that has 42 million coins, but that's already happened 20,000 times. Already 20,000 cryptocurrencies have tried to do something like Bitcoin and change something about it, including a bunch of them who said, let's make 42 million coins. And everybody was like, nope, we'll just own the Bitcoin that has 21 million coins. So you're trusting the consensus and the incentives of humans, but anything that would change the Bitcoin network that would hurt you would hurt everyone else on the Bitcoin network, such as diluting the currency somehow or making more than 21 million. So with Bitcoin, you're trusting the code, just like you do with everything else in your life. You're trusting the computer programmers behind it. But again, in this case with Bitcoin, you don't even have to trust the programmers because the code is open source. You can just audit it and look at it yourself. And the computer programmers behind Bitcoin are, I would argue, better computer programmers than are behind virtually anything else in the world. It's just incredibly, incredibly talented people that are very passionate about Bitcoin, and there is a huge, massive army of them. And then you're trusting the incentives. You're entrusting people not to decide to dilute and devalue their own money. And again, if even one person disagrees, you can't change the network unless you have 100% total consensus. Otherwise, it forces everybody who wants to change the network onto their own version. And that actually happened with something called Bitcoin Cash. There was a group of people, including Roger Ver, who was on a Tucker Carlson interview recently, he's become a bit of a pariah in the Bitcoin community. He backed a change to Bitcoin that the majority of Bitcoiners did not agree with. It was not a change in the amount of Bitcoin. He still wanted there to be 21 million, but it was a change in how easy it is to secure and audit the Bitcoin network, specifically audit the Bitcoin network. And for a variety of reasons I won't go into, there was a massive fight about that back in 2017. And ultimately, all of the people that agreed with Roger Ver decided to launch their own network. And that network, which is called BCH instead of BTC, which is the real Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash is called BCH, sometimes called Bcash. And it's trading at 1/200th of the price of Bitcoin. So that token, which attempted to change something about Bitcoin that not everyone agreed with, that token, since its launch, has lost 99.5% of its value. Literally 199/200ths of its value have disappeared because it was not there was not a consensus that change should happen to Bitcoin. So that is just the probability that something bad happens to Bitcoin. The owners of Bitcoin are absolutely positively not going to agree to change something about Bitcoin that changes, the value of Bitcoin to them, which means there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin because you're never going to get 100% of the Bitcoin owners to agree to devalue their currency. So, and again, also as it relates to everything else you trust in life, it's the same way. With your fiat currencies, you're trusting your banks, much more so than you're trusting Bitcoin, and you're trusting a very small number of people at the Federal Reserve to decide how much money there is in the world. And so instead of trusting everyone that owns a US dollar not to debase the value of the US dollar, with US dollars, you're trusting basically 12 people to decide what your money's worth, which are the various, Federal Reserve, the representatives of the Federal Reserve, including especially the chairman of the Federal Reserve. So The current financial system requires way more trust in way shakier and untrustworthy things than Bitcoin. Bitcoin really doesn't require any trust, but if you want to say it does, it's trust. It's trust in things you already trust with all sorts of things in your life, like computer code and the developers, the software developers behind computer code, and the incentives that make sure that Amazon doesn't cheat you. Any company could cheat you out of money somehow by taking your credit card information and not shipping a product, and they don't because they have an incentive not to. And in the case of Bitcoin, hundreds of millions of people have an incentive not to change the rules. And that is the case with all money. In the case of all money, it's based on the consensus of how money works and who's behind it. And that's just, that will always be the case. So to summarize, with Bitcoin, why can you trust Bitcoin? It is more trustworthy than anything else in the world. The software is more solid. The developers behind it are more solid. The network is more resilient than the entire internet. And if you trust the internet with anything in your life, Bitcoin is far more trustworthy than the internet as a whole. So if you think it's okay to use the internet, and if you trust the internet to carry your credit card number over the wires, or if you trust the internet with private or personal information, or if you trust your smartphone to have private or personal information, or your credit card numbers or debit card numbers on it, that level of trust to trust those things is much more at risk than the trust you put by investing in Bitcoin. The cryptography, the math, with Bitcoin, you're trusting cryptography, just like you are with your traditional banks. You're trusting mathematics, just like you are with your traditional banks, except in all of those things, Bitcoin is much more secure than your bank. It is the cryptography that is used to secure it is more secure than whatever your bank is already using. And so I look at it, some people say, I just don't know if I can trust Bitcoin. My answer is, if you don't think you could trust Bitcoin, how do you trust anything? Because Bitcoin is the most trustworthy and absolute thing that exists in the entire world. And last thing I'll say, if you don't trust the code and you don't trust the developers and you don't trust the incentives, then maybe you trust the fact that BlackRock and Fidelity and Franklin Templeton and almost all of the largest firms on Wall Street are actively marketing Bitcoin to their clients in the form of Bitcoin ETFs, which are just an exchange traded fund as a wrapper that goes around Bitcoin. But inside it, the only thing in there is Bitcoin. And they are actively marketing. So if you think, well, how do I know I can trust this? The answer is, do you trust the largest? BlackRock manages $12 trillion of assets. They're the largest money manager in the world. And they came out yesterday, $12 trillion BlackRock, largest money manager in the world, and said, everybody who has a standardized portfolio ought to be able to put at least 1% to 2% of that in Bitcoin. Now, they say BlackRock has also said the optimum number is 85%, but they're saying, look, everybody, it's reasonable to put a couple percent at least of your portfolio in Bitcoin. And they run the largest Bitcoin ETF. BlackRock does. They're the largest firm for asset manager on Wall Street, and they have the largest Bitcoin ETF. So even if you are not sure you can trust everything else, do you trust all of the financial organizations that are actively selling this? I promise you, BlackRock, Fidelity, two of the largest financial managers in the world, they did not go start marketing Bitcoin to all of their clients without doing their due diligence. They did the work. They got their software developers, their hackers. They got all of those people to go pound on Bitcoin to make sure it was solid before they started marketing it to their clients. And BlackRock would never jeopardize their reputation as a $12 trillion asset manager to put their clients in something, risky or unsolid. They would never do that. It makes no sense to risk $12 trillion just to put 50 billion, 1/20th of one of those trillion. I mean, it makes no sense to put to risk those clients on something that might blow up, which tells you it's not going to blow up. Bitcoin's not going to blow up. The largest asset managers in the world and many of the largest investors in the world are actively investing in Bitcoin because it's rock solid. And they have done the due diligence and they have done the work. So even if you don't have time to do the due diligence and to do the work, look at the world and say, hey, you didn't audit the code that runs the internet and you still use the internet. You didn't audit the code that runs your smartphone. You still use your smartphone. You still transact on Amazon. You still buy stuff online. You still have your credit cards, your credit cards every time you swipe a credit card at a retailer, any sort of store, your credit card number immediately hits the internet. Even if you don't enter it on the internet, that credit card number immediately hits the internet every time you use it at any store, anywhere in the world. It immediately hits the internet to go get processed by Visa or MasterCard or whatever. So even if you haven't personally audited all those things, you trust Visa and MasterCard not to mess you up. And it's the same thing here. You trust BlackRock and Fidelity and all of the largest money managers and some of the most successful, many of the most successful investors in the world who have done the research, who have done the work, who have audited the code, who have played out every single conceivable scenario where something bad could happen to Bitcoin. And they decide as a result of that, we are going to recommend this to our clients, even though it represents a tiny percent of the assets that they manage. The total reputational damage, if something bad happened to Bitcoin, would be huge. And they're willing to take that risk because they have evaluated it as essentially zero risk. They have looked at it and said the probability that something bad happens to Bitcoin is effectively zero. And because it's effectively zero, we can confidently market this product to our clients and customers, just like we do Tesla and Amazon and Apple and Google and Facebook and all of those other things. So anyway, Bitcoin is just about the most trustworthy thing in the entire world. And you don't have to take my word for it. Go search the internet, go do your own research, and you'll find that all of the smartest people have come to the same conclusion of the rock solid nature of Bitcoin. And the most beautiful part about Bitcoin is you don't have to trust anybody. There's no single entity that can mess you up or change the money supply. It's decentralized, which means there's nobody that can make the decisions to derail everything. There's a million people that can fix something if something goes wrong, but there's nobody that can single-handedly mess it up, or even a small group of people that can single-handedly mess it up, because everybody's watching the Bitcoin code and nobody upgrades to the next version of the Bitcoin code unless, a million people have reviewed the code and everybody's decided it's rock solid. So Bitcoin is just about the most certain thing in the entire world, and that stability is built on just an incredible and an inordinate amount of time and labor and reputation that everyone has staked in it to make sure Bitcoin is just the most rock solid thing in the world. So as far as trust goes, I would put Bitcoin at 100 out of 100. And basically everything else in the world, I trust less than Bitcoin. If you put an index of all the things I trust in the world, I would say, the love of my family, God, and, the credibility of Bitcoin's monetary properties, all of those are in the, 100-point index on a 100-point scale. Virtually everything in your life that you use or that you trust is less trustworthy than Bitcoin. Have a great night, everyone.